Cool. So it's 12:05. We can get rolling. Again, Matthew, really, really excited to have you on. I want to start this off. I know you've written a few mirror posts about like the Songcamp story and like how things got rolling. But I think a story is always better told like out loud versus in text, at least in my opinion. So would love you to just run through like the origins of Songcamp, how you got involved, how you got interested in the space, and we can kind of take it from there.
Cool. Yeah. Well, the idea for Songcamp, or even just the name Songcamp, has been a word that's been like ringing in my ears for many years. So I'm a musician first and foremost, and have been spending, most or full time on music for the last 4 or 5 years. Did move to LA for a few years and came back to Montreal when COVID hit. But pursuing music primarily as a singer-songwriter, and things really, when I started taking that seriously, maybe in 2016, 2017, I got lucky enough to go on a songwriting camp. And it really changed my entire perspective on music and on just like collaborative creation. It really opened my eyes to what was possible, having only created music with a handful of people in Montreal before then, and suddenly meeting all these new people and creating music in this fast-paced, fun environment. But then kind of like a year or 4 years, or even to this day later, like 36 songs came out of this week-long songwriting camp in Nicaragua, and only 2 of those songs ever made their way out into the world. And that's just one example of like things I've faced throughout my time in music, where just like a lot of good music doesn't make it out there. And then of course, we could spend this and many other calls just talking about all the ways that even the music that does make it out there doesn't necessarily realize its value for all the musicians, especially independent musicians. So all that to say, like the idea for Songcamp as a name even started for me back in like 2018, the year after that first songwriting camp, where I had this idea where I wanted to start something called Songcamp, and I would buy all the songs or somehow find an investor and buy the songs from that camp because I thought they were amazing, and put them out under this like brand Songcamp. So it was like I have all these old PSD, all these old Photoshop files of Songcamp logos from even back then, but I never actually pursued that. And then it was when I kind of got back to Montreal through a friend of mine, fell down the Web3 rabbit hole. He was working in DeFi and started teaching me all about Ethereum and layer 2 technologies and all this like kind of way down the pipe stuff. But as an artist myself, I was really interested, like, how does this stuff touch the surface, the street level? How does this stuff affect, artists and creators? And that's the thing that really interested me. And then I started, learning about NFTs and all the stuff that's happening more at like the creator level last summer. And it just like completely enveloped me. Just falling down the rabbit hole became like a very good analog for the feeling I was experiencing. And just like spending all my time learning about this stuff and soaking it all in, and just seeing the potential to empower artists in this world. And so kind of on one night in April of this year, I just like took that Songcamp name that I had for so many years, took all the kind of inspiration I was getting from this Web3 kind of period of learning, and threw a Discord up and called it Songcamp and invited like 10 people to it. And the next day I was like, kicking myself. I was like, why'd you do that? You don't even know what you're doing. There's no like real idea there. There's maybe, things kind of like marinating in your head, but why are you throwing something out there without knowing what you're doing? But then one thing led to another, and through kind of like a seed club conference that Jess and others were throwing, and me just like sponsoring that and getting on stage and talking to Jess about some of these ideas I'm throwing around with you now. Some people showed up, and we did the first kind of Songcamp experiment in late April, early May, where 13 musicians, visual artists, and 3 project operatives did the first kind of idea of Songcamp, which was to, experiment and find ways to realize value in a fast and fun way that is akin to what it feels like to go through a songwriting camp. So we kind of created those songs, but then the camp didn't end when the songs were finished. Like most songwriting camps, it extended out into the visual support and the rollout of that music. And within 3 weeks, we created, 3 songs with 9 musicians, put those songs out as one-of-one NFTs, and sold those one-of-one catalog NFTs on a mere auction. And it was just like something that really came together really quickly. And we just like jumped in, these 13 people, and it went super well. And then kind of coming back from that, now we have this thing called Songcamp that wasn't necessarily just to constantly run exactly kind of like that format of running kind of like an IRL songwriting camp, but online, but just experiment at the edges of where music and the new internet crash into each other. And so that's where we are now kind of evolving into Songcamp Electra. So lots going on in like obviously more to jump into there, but that's sort of how it all got inspired and kind of came, about in a very serendipitous like way.
Definitely. That is an insane story. So many follow-up questions that I have, but the first one is sort of a new question. So for somebody who has very little experience with like music production, what does a songwriting camp traditionally look like? How are you spending your time? Like, what are the different roles that are necessary in that sort of camp? Like, can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, good question. So, and I didn't know either going into that 2017 songwriting camp what it really meant. But, as someone who was like a songwriter and singer who doesn't have like production chops, or at that time very much did it, I would work with producers in Montreal. And then I went to this camp as like a singer or songwriter playing that role. So often, songwriting camps can take on a lot of different formats, but the ones that I've been a part of is typically you have a set list of people that you're inviting to this camp, some of which are playing the songwriter role, some are playing the singer and songwriter role, like some maybe are actually like recording the vocals, and then others are like a producer playing the production role. And typically, at least the ones that I've done, it's usually like the producer has their room. So for this camp, it was actually a destination camp in Nicaragua, and we were at this sort of like, there's like this place we were staying that was kind of set up for this sort of thing. So there were 5 producers, and each producer has their own room, their own kind of home makeshift studio set up. And then every day, the singers and the songwriters are like shuffled. So you match with different, maybe like 2 or 3 other songwriters, and then you jump into a room and you create a song together. This camp happened to be such that there were no prompts, and we weren't trying to create a certain type of music. It was sort of like jump in and create something and decide amongst yourself who is going to be the one to sing it. Sometimes that's an obvious choice. Sometimes there's only one real like vocal artist in that room, so they're the ones that cut the vocals. And this camp was sort of like such that we were there for a week. We had 5 days of creating. So each day you're with a different producer. You end up working with all 5 producers, and you're supposed to make a song each day. So at 10 a.m. you start the session with like from complete scratch, and by 10 p.m. you have to have a finished demo that is essentially listenable. And then at like 10:30 p.m. we had a listening party, and we would listen to 5 new songs. And when I first understood the format, getting there on like, let's say the Sunday, I was like, I don't even think this is possible. I was used to making, songs slowly. Take me like a month or 2 to like finish a production or a song with the people I was working with. And now we're going to create 5 songs in 5 days. I was like, that's impossible. But sure enough, we did it, and like amazing music came out of it. And as you can imagine, like those listening parties are just insanely fun at the end. So that's sort of like, the format that camp took on, and others that have been a part of were pretty similar to that.
Interesting. So were there any key differences between the way that original camp was run and the way that the original Songcamp was run? Like Songcamp TM?
Yeah. Well, some quick ones are just, obviously we're not in person, right? So we're not all in the same place. So really like Discord became our event space or our meeting place. And it also wasn't such a like people are carving out a certain amount of time in their lives to then go to this camp and spend all of their time on this camp for, a day or a week or what have you. But it was more like something that is submerged with the rest of your life. So instead of like it being, a song a day, for the first camp, it was like one song within 2 weeks. So each group was broken up into 3 musicians. So it was 3 groups of 3. And each group had 2 weeks to go from scratch to a final song that we would then release. So yeah, kind of creates like a much different dynamic in terms of the amount of time that you have. But also, and then the big difference also was then having the knowledge that the song that you're making is coming out. It is coming out. It's not like you're going to make it and then the listening party is sort of like the quote unquote like public moment of it. And then maybe in a few months to a few years, maybe it would come out. It was sort of like, it is coming out in 2 weeks. We're kind of throwing an event, a party, an auction for it. So I think that also created a different dynamic. And then also having like the kind of visual support around it and the Web3 rollout support around it. It really just, I think, tucked the musicians into like working on the song, and that's your role, just like make music.
Super interesting. So let's zoom back in again to the Web3 aspect of the Songcamp. So you guys ran this camp, you had the fundraiser, it went fantastically well, and now you guys are sort of at this crossroads where you're like, okay, there's a ton of opportunity here. What the hell do we do now, right? And you mentioned just a few minutes ago that this is sort of like how the idea for Songcamp Electra was spawned. Walk us through what that thought process looked like for a bit and how you guys landed on this idea for Electra.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, at the base level, like I think the ethos here, even during that first camp, is sort of like, okay, there are these Web3 tools and they have a lot of potential in capturing new and more value for artists. But we aren't exactly sure how to use these tools yet. It's extremely new. The whole world isn't here yet. We don't know how they're going to go mainstream. We don't know what's going to work and what isn't. So this is like high time to experiment, to run experiments, to have a hypothesis, a thesis, and throw it out there and execute against it, see how it goes, and then learn from it and try something new. So I think right from the beginning, it was sort of like, let's try something. We have no idea what we're doing here. We're 13 artists. We're throwing something out here. We didn't know if these 3 NFTs would get any action or if anyone would buy them. And then to our surprise, it went exceeded our expectations by a lot. But it was still, it's like, okay, so we ran one experiment and it really worked. And we were able to carve out value for these artists who created this thing. And, the visual support for it, the marketing support, the distribution support for it helped in that. What if we built more support around songs coming out? What if we carved more support around those musicians and that music? And not only that, but built more of an experience and more of a story for people to identify with and be a part of on the audience side, right? So, because the other thing of having 3 people or 3, wallets, people, owners of these 3 songs, it's amazing, but it's also kind of limiting the experience. How can we open it up to more people, and how can we make it more of a thing to be a part of? And so that's where this building this through line of a story, of a world started showing its head from. And that's where Electra came from. What if we built this world called Electra, this story, and allowed people to basically enter it through their imaginations, but also through the art we're creating, the mechanics we're using, invite them into this world, and then let the music sprout out of the center of that world. And what would that do to people's experience with the music and the value that they put on it, both internally, sentimentally, and therefore through expression of potentially collecting a one of one, or collecting a multi-edition, or having some way of saying, I really like this and I want to show that through giving something that is of value to me. whether that be ETH or otherwise. And so that's sort of like where the experiment comes from here, and why it's like, I guess, an evolution of the hypothesis for the first camp of let's build more support around the music, and let's build more experience for the audience, and see what happens, essentially.
It's interesting because like that was obviously not a very different vision, but like a much more expansive vision than the original Songcamp vision, which is already really freaking cool, right? So I guess my question for you is like, this community at its origin was just 10 people that you threw into a Discord and you weren't sure what was going to happen. And then obviously it slowly grew from there. What did the community dynamics look like as far as brainstorming the vision for Electra? So like, who was involved? Like, what were the conversations that were happening? How were they broken up? Like, was it an organized process, or was it sort of just like conversations that were happening throughout you guys' regular, I believe, Monday calls throughout the course of like a few months?
Yeah, so, well, it was a few fold. So I think at first it was sort of, just like ad hoc conversations about where to go next. And that took a while, like we ended the first camp in early May and then launched this one early July. So kind of a few months in between there, where these conversations were happening, and certain people who were part of the first camp definitely took a deeper interest in, where is this going from here? And so those conversations were kind of just happening naturally over time. And this idea of like a story started sprouting from those, and this idea of, and then Electra came from those. And then the interactive level or interactive layer came from those. But with that, during that time, we were also kind of running mini experiments on those Monday calls. So for instance, one week we had a mini camp where we just another experiment, and this one kind of like an hour long, where, okay, it was really fun to make 3 songs in 2 weeks with these 3 teams. What if we created teams on this phone call and had people make art in 35 minutes? And, the stipulation there not being, you have to make the best art of your life, but you just need to make art in 35 minutes. Like throwing a new constraint out there and seeing what happens. And that was a lot of fun. And then we also did a communal avatar creation session in Figma, where we all worked on like the Songcamp's logo together, and everyone kind of creating art and compiling that together. And through those, what we were really doing was experimenting with, I think, like micro versions of where we're at now, which is creating like the containers for people to then create something, like fill in with their own expression, their own creative expression, their own art. So, the container for those being, you have 35 minutes to make a song here on Discord, or even visual art was created with that. Or here's the Figma, here's your workstation. You have these like pixels to fill in over this time, and we're going to compile it together, and that's our logo. That's the container for that. And then this container is sort of that story, the Electro world, and starting to like the outline of that story being presented at the beginning of camp. And then now people filling it in. Like now there's like a story team that's been stood up and is essentially building out the story and more of its details as time goes on, So it's like we're filling in the lines that were already presented, and we're also finishing the lines, of this coloring book. So I think those are like the real 2 ways that stood up this Electra idea. I think just to add to that is like, I think something, that came from out of that first camp was like, okay, how do you scale this? What does scaling look like? And what kind of, scaling is a very hot word. Like, let's grow this, let's scale it. But like, what do we really want to do? We really want to empower artists to be able to do what they want to do and realize value, more or new value from it, find new paths to value for it. And one way to do that is to just like create more and more of these camps and just completely open it up such that everyone, maybe it's just like one, it's not just 3 teams making music now, but it's 30 or something like that. and you just like Songcamp gets bigger and bigger. Songcamp 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 12. Or you can scale at the curation level. So instead of there being like one Songcamp, and right now it's like that, because right now it's like Songcamp 2 is Songcamp Electra, because it's just the capacity level of this early. It's hard to, it takes all of Songcamp's resources essentially to run a camp. But the future could look like many people running many camps, and it not being me or the people who were kind of like at the core during the first camp who helped create the idea for Electra and create that container for this camp, but it could be all sorts of people creating their own containers and building their own camps. So kind of see a future where it's not Songcamp Electra and then we do Songcamp Zygon and it's this, the same group but bigger. But it's like these camps can become their own planets in the greater like Songcamp ecosystem, and they can be started by whoever. So I think like through the learnings of a camp like Electra, we can start to construct the rails that make it easier and the costs, both in time and money, go down to start a camp, such that anyone can kind of spin up a camp, and the admin, the work it takes in between the intermediary work, that gets squeezed down by better and greater Web3 tools and rails, so that really you're just maximizing the creative aspect of it, the curative and the creative aspect of starting a camp, such that like eventually becomes the click of a button to start a camp. And a lot of the tools needed to organize and collectively coordinate and then find paths to monetization, those are not as heavy of a lift, such that we can really start to run a much more distributed version of what's happening now. I know I just went off on like a crazy tangent to your idea, but I wanted to
That's fantastic. I think there are like two big threads from what you just shared that I want to dive down. And I'll kind of let you decide which one we go down first. So the first is this idea of containers, or like in my head, I'm seeing these as constraints, right? So when you place particular constraints on a project, what does that mean for the end result? And the way I'm thinking about this now is like in the specific case of like a community or a DAO, how do the active constraints that are being placed on the community at the beginning, at its origin, affect the ways that like things turn out over time, right? So that's like one conversation that we could have that I'd love to continue. The second conversation is around this idea of like decentralized Songcamp, right? So if you're distributing Songcamp and having multiple different camps, and honestly, I think these conversations are sort of tied together. Like, how do you ensure that the constraints that you're creating that have sort of led to the creative output being as high quality as it has been so far, how do you ensure that those constraints are being distributed across all of the different groups that are running camps, right? So we'll let you answer that question however you'd like, but really it's just around this idea of constraints and then constraints as applied to community and decentralized community.
Yeah. Love both those questions so much. I think that's like, deep interest to me, the answers to those. I mean, what comes up for me right away is sort of like, it's fun to, we're playing in such new waters. It's like helpful to find analogs that just like offer some level of like frameworks or precedents that you can point to and be like, okay, that's, that nudges in the direction of what we're doing here. So one thing that comes up in terms of like this idea of a distributed Songcamp ecosystem is like franchises. And I don't think that's a perfect analog, but I think there's something to get from there where it's like, I think to like that McDonald's, if you've seen the McDonald's, I forget the name of the movie right now, but the one about that, a guy who started it, who ends up being like he's a kind of a big asshole. So it's not the perfect analog in that sense either, hopefully, but you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'm trying to think of oh my God, I'll look it up while you're talking, but yeah, go ahead.
But anyways, the point, the thing I'm trying to just tease out of there is that, he like, they're running this amazing, like the original founders are running this like incredibly, like the constraints are tight. They're screwed on tight, right? They have like their thing down to like mathematic degree of kind of making these burgers, and it's so well done. And then they start to franchise and they lose quality. because like they're just like extending it too far, and like those constraints are being loosened, and therefore quality is diluted. And then, but eventually they figure that out. They find more highly motivated franchisee owners who develop that quality. So there's probably something to take from there, you know. And I can't sit here and say that I have like the perfect answers for you in terms of how do you satisfy for those constraints such that you maintain that quality. But I think another part of the answer is I don't know that you have to in the long run. I think like, again, if like the costs of starting these camps is squeezed down, and running these camps is squeezed down to like the level where it really just takes, you know, anyone who wants to can run a camp and define the constraints that they want. Like, I think these camps, you know, I find it funny because it's like we're so zoomed into Songcamp Electra right now, and the only thing to take away is what Songcamp Electra is doing, as this is what Songcamp is. But to me, it's like this is like one like small sliver, thin thing of like an idea that can be executed on along a humongous spectrum of how these things can be done. So it could be like maybe 20 people jump into a camp and they have no idea. They want to do this kind of story overarching idea, but they have no idea what the story is. They start with a blank page, and it's like this super decentralized building blocks of what that's going to be. Another, all the way on the other end of the spectrum, can be an artist who has an idea for their world, comes in and says, hey, this is the world I want to build. I'm looking for 14 people to help me build this world. If you want to come in and like help me color it in, these are like the things we're going to do. And it's like way more highly defined. And there's everything in between there. And I think eventually, you know, if you can get to the level where the costs of running that are so low that every marginal camp is as simple as every marginal record, you know, that like the costs of creating the next record with MP3 squeezed down to zero. So we got streaming. So if like the cost of like collective coordination and path to monetization squeezes down to zero, what do you get then? Like, I think you could have tons and tons of these camps running. And I don't know that you need to like ensure for quality. You know, it's just like people can then just create whatever they want. They go off and create their own community, their own space. And it's sort of like, you know, to me, the future is like we're not all dropping our content, our art into the ocean of Spotify and Instagram. We're dropping it into our communities, our own planets, you know, our own worlds, and the people in there that care about it. So it's like, you know, who am I to be like the like subjective curator of what is good and what is bad? In this planet of like Electra, yeah, I definitely have more of that role because we're like zoomed into this project where some constraints are created such that early days, yeah, I think it is important to solve for that quality so that you can build like the actual community, the brand, and get to the place where you can afford to bring the cost down for everyone to run their own camps. But I think in the long run, I don't know that you need to solve for that quality. And I think it just becomes this like distributed network where those constraints are completely subjective and are completely allowed to be like free to be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so many thoughts running through my head right now. Like the way that I'm sort of thinking about this, again, like abstracted out to like this broader conversation around like community and DAO development is at the beginning of a project, as the founder, you sort of have the opportunity to like mold what that container is going to look like, right? And obviously, as that container becomes distributed and everybody has their own container, like you no longer have control over quality. And I think that question, which I think you answered very, very well, is a separate question than like who, as things get distributed, should the mold stay the same? So should people just continue filling that container in whatever way they choose to fill the container? Or as things get distributed, should they also have the power to like remold the container into like their fashion based off of what that individual sub community is looking for? So in the case of Songcamp, what that looks like is like right now you have a very specific vision about what Electra is going to look like, and people can sort of fill the container of Electra in however way they see fit. But at the moment, only the core team has power to actually like mold what Electra looks like, right? the future of the Songcamp community, though, and when we talk about like decentralized song camps, do you see this more as looking like, okay, we set out like the tools that could be used and the framework that should be used, and then just like have people run with that however they see fit? Or is it even less formal than that, where it's like, yo, here's the philosophy that we're working under, and people can sort of mold their own containers and set their own constraints as they see fit? I'm sorry if that's like a very vague question, but that's sort of how I'm thinking about things right now.
Yeah. Well, two things come up for me, and like the second one, I think requires a bit more clarity on the question. But okay, so I wanted to like talk about like we can go. I do like improv comedy, and we talk in like you're at any time you're either expanding on what you're talking about, or you're what's the other word? You're either like moving it forward, or you're like where you are and you're expanding on that. Right? So it's like, I don't know why I'm saying that analog. The point is like, let's talk further. Let's talk like down the road for the Electra project and the Electra DAO, and then like the wider Songcamp project.
Perfect.
So I think for this exact project, I think the container is defined, but it's loose. And that's what I mean when I say like, you know, other people are helping fill that container in, yes, but also construct the container in the sense that, especially when we think about the story side, it's like it started from me presenting on a PowerPoint of like, what is the outline of the story? What is the world of Electra? And now there is a story team of like 3 or 4 people who are developing that more than me. You know, like they've taken it further on their own. And other people who are interested, curious to play in those waters are bringing that up as well. And I think down the line, like it's like the mission control around even the Electra story and the Electra project kind of fades into the rest of the community. And a DAO has really stood up. You know, so right now we have this Electra token. It has been distributed amongst the contributors of ETH during the crowdfund. But we've held back the majority of that token to be distributed, the majority of which distributed amongst the contributors to the camp, right? So at the end of the camp, we end up with, and when I say the end of the camp, I mean literally in a few weeks, like August 2nd to 4th is kind of like the end of the Songcamp Electra phase. We will then have like a contribution graph mapped to this token. So this token will literally be like the measure of the dynamic levels of influence in the project based off your contribution, whether that was through ETH or through work or through art or what have you. And then it's way more decentralized in terms of where to go next. Phase 2 becomes way just, you know, the people who stepped up and were like, I love this story, I want to keep building the story. They have more, you know, Electra and can help carve out the decisions we make moving forward, whether that means building the story out more, whether it means finding more routes of monetization and like distribution for the story as far as it is now and all the IP and art that's been created. And it becomes way more of this, distributed network of decision-making and curation as to what the story needs and where to take the project. So that's sort of like, and again, that is still one slice along the spectrum of what these containers can look like. This is one where I think the container is begun, and then it starts to like more and more be like progressively decentralized as to where this project and its story, its world, its game can go. So that's the first part. Then we back up to the greater Songcamp ecosystem. And you were kind of asking about, okay, are you giving like the tools? Are you giving the container and saying, here's the container you should use, go build your own? Or are you giving the philosophy? And I think what we're talking about there is like, what is like the base level, like open source layer to Songcamp such that these quote unquote franchises, which is an okay analog, but not perfect. What are they getting essentially to start? You know, like what is Songcamp providing such that they, like, what is the recipe that Songcamp's providing such that they can begin their camp? Is that sort of like the question on that end?
Yeah, that's exactly the question.
Yeah, so I think so far it's like through running these camps, we're learning a lot, like we're learning, it's messy and it's new, and we're just like learning fast because we're just like doing stuff in these uncharted waters. And I think through that stuff, we can eventually learn, okay, what works in terms of like collective coordination, what doesn't, how can we make it easier for people to work together, to know, what their paths to valuation towards the work that they put into that is. And eventually I think those things can be baked into tools, such that like, instead of it being like an email that you're part of this camp and then like, we're going to see, we don't have budget yet, but we're going to find out. And then, okay, we have a token and we're going to figure out distribution. Like it's all kind of like happening in real time. You can have tools such that like, first of all, just backing up for a second. The Songcamp layer can be a layer of community, of tech, and of resources on the financial side. So there can be a grant system such that like, okay, you're going to start your camp. Here's some ETH to go do that. The community, like this could be like a rich network, hopefully of like a data rich network also of just like artists, operatives, all sorts of people in this wider Songcamp ecosystem that can be brought in or invited in or asked to become part of different sorts of camps. And then there could also be this tech layer where, it being just like built. I envision it being built on these like Web3 rails where, if you're invited to a camp and you agree to what it is and you click this button, your ETH address is now sent in and you're locked into that, your role of being like, let's say one of three in this band. And if you guys deliver your song and let's say the curators of that camp say, yes, that song is in, they click a button to get the song and the stems, and you permissionless or like trustlessly receive some escrowed ETH and your tokens, for your work. Like it can become like this tech layer that makes it a lot easier to distribute value, to collectively coordinate, and to feel like there's infrastructure there, that your work is being valued and accounted for, your attribution is being accounted. Like as we move into deeper levels of collective creation, as we move into deeper levels of world building, the problem of attribution becomes exponentially greater. Like the human way of creating, especially when it comes to art, is like so human and messy. And it's like carving out these, like, let's say recipes or bounties of like, you're going to do this and it ends here and this next thing starts here and you're doing that. That is extremely limited because you can't account for the way that people improvise and humans like instinctually make art together or work together. And with these Web3 rails, we can keep up with the exponential speed that is going to happen in terms of what it means to attribute people for their work and like tracking that and then being valued for that. And I think that's like one of the big things that Web3 actually allows us to do is like this. It's perfect time. This infrastructure that's being built, it's still so early, but it's the perfect time because we're also in a time, I'm taking another tangent here, where I believe like we're moving into a completely new space of what it means to make art. Because like we are going to, like Songcamp Electra is such an early example of this. We are going to get really good at collective coordination. We are going to get really good at like hive mind creation. And it's going to produce all sorts of new types of art that I don't think we can even imagine right now. And I think in order to be able to keep up with that on like the financial stack, the valued stack, the empowerment stack, the sustainability stack, so that artists can pay their fucking rent, Web3 is the answer for that.
Yeah. I love the way you framed, like, we are going to get really freaking good at collective coordination because we are not really freaking good at it yet. And like the technology is there for us to get really good at it, but it's still going to take a ton of experiments like Songcamp to figure out what are the ideal models and who should be using them and what are the frameworks and all of this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's what fascinates me most about the project. Like, obviously, you guys are just doing really dope stuff in general, but it's an extremely organic experiment in like, what can collective coordination look like if given this very specific goal? And then once that goal is achieved, how can we then like expand the goal from there? Again, like using that collective imagination. But again, like there's so much left to think about here. And I can continue asking 1,000,001 questions, but I know people in the audience have submitted some, so we're going to jump to those really quick. Both of these questions are more like big picture, like Songcamp vision related. So just to mentally prepare yourself. The first is from Captain Skeletor. So he says, both Songcamp and Electra are bold and expansive experiments. If you had the power to guarantee one outcome or achievement from these experiments, what would it be?
If I could guarantee one goal, I would say, I mean, I think it, like at the end of the day, it's like it's about like the humans who are a part of it, you know. So I guess like what comes up for me is really just like, what was the human experience of this? Was it a good human experience? You know, like my thoughts go also to like, and then this is I think based off of the rant I just went on, a bit left over or after going from that of just like, you know, I think one of the things thinking about, especially when the first camp started, is like experimenting with Web3, experimenting with this collective creation, but like, does it change the art that's made? And that's also part of the human experience, you know, where it's like people had, were just like, because of the constraints allotted, they're just like expressed a different style of freedom to just like make something. You know, it's not for my band project, it's not for my artist, you know, image. It's with two strangers that I just met. And so like the art that is made is maybe a result of the human experience. So did the art that came out of it, is it inherently different and wouldn't have come because without this sort of model or without these constraints? But more importantly, is that a product of like the human experience that was had and shared here? And was it a good one? You know, I think that's really like, you know, the feedback from the people who went through Electra and for whoever's part of Songcamp moving forward, like that to me is the most important thing. And is it a thing of like, ooh, this is a new way for me to make stuff I want, a new way for me to commune with other like-minded people, a new way for me to realize value for the work and art that I want to be putting out into the world. So yeah, it really just centers around that like human layer, human experience of it.
Awesome. And then the second audience question, and if we had time, we can bring people to stage real quick to jam. The second question was from Drago Nates. What are your top 3 goals to accomplish with the crowdfund, and how do you plan to achieve them?
Well, again, like the goal is really like, you know, we had no idea what was going to happen with this crowdfund, and that really blew us away too, you know, in terms of like we were going to set the goal originally to 10 ETH, and we were like, yeah, maybe we'll get to like 7. It would be crazy. That'd be sick, you know? And then like it really just took off. And now we're like empowered to just do more and also to realize more value for the humans who are a part of this project. So I think like the number one goal is realizing everyone's value in this network. And we're going to be getting into that this week, you know, discussing collectively what that looks like and how we're allocating this budget. And then the other thing is to like be able to really push this experiment as far as we can. I think this gives us the firepower to do more, both now in terms of like the expansiveness of the interactive kind of game model of that the ticket holders are experiencing by going through this project, this world. And then also like the questions can be that much more imaginative about what we do next, right? Like what happens after phase 1 is complete. We have this world that we co-created. We have this story. We have this group of people who now have gotten a lot better at something that is still so early and messy of like collective coordination, collective creation. And we have hopefully some of that budget intact and left over to continue to do stuff together, or for those who want to keep pushing this project forward. So I guess, yeah, it has to really do with like realizing the value for people's work that they've been putting into this. It's just amazing to see, also to witness the intrinsic motivation. Like, I'm very intrinsically motivated to work on this project. I'm spending my whole life now doing it. But just to see other people really, really take to it before we had any idea, that we're going to get any sort of budget. People are just into it. And so now that we do have that, it's like, it's an incredible way to be able to, for us all to be compensated for that intrinsic motivation. And then, yeah, to keep the project, to be able to keep that project going and alive and like take it deeper and extend its reach.
Makes sense. I think the intrinsic motivation piece is huge. I think it's really difficult to run experiments at the scale that you're running them. And like run that risk of failure, which like obviously could be like a really rewarding experience still, but like you still need some level of intrinsic motivation because the money might not always be there. So really, really, really important point. I'm glad you emphasized that. I would love to open the stage now to anybody who wants to come up, jam, ask a question. Also, I know there's some struggles with the POAP links. We apologize, people be thirsty for the POAP links. But yeah, we'll try to get that worked out as quickly as possible. But yeah, raise your hand if anybody wants to come to stage and ask a question, or if you want to drop it in the voice text, that's cool as well. If not, I have a couple other questions, but Matthew, is there anything that you want to jam on a bit more, or just kind of like share with the audience about like the way things are going and questions you might have?
I mean, I'm also down to, I don't know how much time there is, but there's some people in the audience who are part of the project. You're hearing me blabber about it forever, but I don't know if anyone else who's part of Songcamp Electra would want to jump up, or even if I know there's some Genesis people in here.
That'd be dope. Anybody want to come to stage real quick and just share some thoughts on things we've been chatting about so far? All right, Peacemode, you should be able to hop up to stage. Just give it a second. There we go. Yo.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So I'm Peacemode. I'm leading the visual crew for Electra. And I guess I just wanted to say, to speak to the expansive universes, Matthew, that you talked about dreaming up, it really has been amazing. Like coming from the first camp and dealing with like the scope of 3 songs to now Electra, where we're dealing with the scope of human imagination and seeing the way decentralization impacts story, delivery, like overall vision has been like incredibly profound for me as an artist, because I mean, yeah, it's like, it is like collaboration is difficult. We were talking, you guys both spoke about the challenges of collaborating on the internet and the new tools that we have, and like how we're going to continue to learn to do that. And just already being in like week 2 or week 3, wherever we are right now, it's like amazing to see the growth from all the teams. And like yesterday, I got to sit in on a Swarm call, and hearing the ideas that people were putting together was just really beautiful and inspiring. And I'm thankful. And that's really all I wanted to share.
That's dope. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like I have only been like very tangentially involved with Songcamp, unfortunately. Oh, dang, you already dropped off stage. But yeah, just the energy coming out of the community, even from somebody outside of the community, is just like extremely noticeable and is really empowering no matter what you're working on. So I can only imagine what's happening inside some of these calls, and I really hope to get involved as quickly as possible. Like Carlos said in the voice text, the FF Songcamp collab needs to happen. Not sure what that's going to look like, but I'm sure it would be incredible. So Would love to jam on that more as well.
I think we're down. I don't know what that looks like either, but I'm super excited to find out.
Yeah, we don't need to know what it looks like yet. We just need to know that we want to do it. That's the important part.
That's it.
Dope. Anybody else want to hop the stage real quick? If not, we could end it a few minutes early, but I want to make sure people have time if they would like. All right, cool. Well, Matthew, you the man. Thank you so much for this. This was awesome. My head is literally just racing with like all sorts of questions, and I'm like just thinking about these opportunities. So, I mean, that means you guys are onto something awesome. So, really appreciate you sharing for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on, and it's been a lot of fun to chat. Look forward to another one.
Sweet. Any quick announcements you want to make to the community before you dip? Any plugs?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to be coming out with some new artwork before the week is out. And then our kind of big event, which will be also like the songs premiering, will be August 2nd. So a few Mondays away. So those are kind of like the big days. And yeah, right now we kind of have the Electra Discord up, and ticket holders are in there. And we're looking for ways to make it just like more seamless, because right now it's like sort of to be a part of the Electra Discord and the ensuing game that's happening is like you need the portal ticket as well as the associated Electra tokens that you kind of got with your purchase during the crowdfund. But obviously, like if people want to like get in now and want the ticket, it's kind of like cumbersome to move that around plus the Electra. So trying to find like just a different funnel for everything so that it's easier for people to jump in if they still want to. So probably announce something if we can figure that out maybe early next week as the game evolves. We had our first kind of like interactive level 1 of the Electra game started Monday, which was a lot of fun. People were definitely like involved and excited, and it ended with a NFT airdrop for people who kind of made it through the path. So that's always fun. Yeah, more to come on that too.
Awesome. Yeah, please continue to share with the community, and if there's any way that we can help out, just let us know for sure. And then on Forefront Sends, just for those of you who might not have seen, season 1 is officially kicked off on Monday. The primary thing is that we're working on right now is kicking off these guilds. So we've got the Writers Guild, the Culture Guild, the Growth Guild. If you're looking to get involved in Forefront, want to be a contributor, just interested in learning more about any of these, check out the Get Involved channel under governance, or just DM me or Carlos or anybody else who you see active in the general chat, and we should be able to point you in the right direction. But yeah, Matthew, appreciate you, and hopefully talk soon. Appreciate everybody coming out.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.